Hello and welcome. I'm very pleased to be having the opportunity to share some fantastic information with all of you as part of the CPA Mentor Center Resources webinar series. And I will be presenting 6 modules around the topic of coaching. And today we will be covering the first of these 6 sessions. Of course, the introduction will be first, and the program is called The Essentials of Coaching, and this is, of course, Module 1. I'm very passionate of really helping people be able to learn a little bit about 2 things. Number 1 is the value of our higher order, or what is sometimes called soft skills, development. That's the thing I'm most passionate about. And today we're going to be looking at, and throughout the 6 modules, we're going to be looking at what I would call the 2 ends of this development. One is really helping you, as a coach, be able to develop some additional skills in those areas, but most importantly, be able to really communicate and, for the lack of a better term, sell the idea of higher order leadership and management skills to your student coachees. So we will be looking at both of these ends, both the skill development from your end as a coach, as well as some of the meta components of this, where we're actually learning the stuff ourselves and communicating the value of those things to our coach students. So that's going to be the focus for the next 6 modules of this program. I want to start off following this introduction by just telling you a little bit about the entire agenda of the 6 modules. So, of course, today we will be looking at the introduction to coaching, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to be looking at specifically. Module 2, we'll be looking at coaching applications across contexts, specifically around the idea of work performance and performance at work. Next, in Module 3, we'll be looking at career coaching, specifically around, again, being able to communicate the value of higher order skills to your student coaches for the purposes of elevating, enhancing, and further developing their own careers. In Module 4, we'll be looking at specific applications, again, across contexts, but we'll be looking at tools for coaches. And in Module 5, we'll be continuing that conversation to look at another set of tools and skills for coaches. And in our final module, we'll focus primarily upon the challenges that might be associated with coaching, and perhaps some of the things that you might encounter. And my hope is that I can anticipate some of the things that you might encounter, some of the challenges you might encounter, and perhaps even to answer proactively some of the questions that you might have about the material. So it makes sense to get right into today's content. I've been, of course, brought up in academia, so I do often start with some definitions. So we'll be beginning today by looking at what coaching really is, to try to get a handle on this topic area that's very popular and widespread. But there isn't always a really solid definition of what coaching is, and what the role of a coach is. To really illustrate what coaching is would be to outline a little bit about why we should even bother with coaching. What's the purpose? What's the value in coaching across the board? Both from the perspective of us as coaches, you as a coach, also from the perspective of the coachees, the students that you'll be coaching, as well as around generally the ways in which organizations, those that you work for and those that you don't work for, can benefit from coaching. We'll be looking at, again specifically, how does coaching address the needs of all parties involved? I also have found in my work teaching people about coaching that it's very crucial to be able to outline what a coach is and what a coach is not, because oftentimes we get this role perhaps confused with other types of roles that we might have. So sometimes, sometimes coaches might inadvertently take it a little bit too far in areas like make it look more therapeutic and more analytical, which is not something we want as a coach. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're also going to cover some of the various contexts in which coaching is commonly used in organizations and in the business environment and across multiple organizational contexts. And we'll look at some of these various roles, specifically the role of an external coach, an internal coach, a manager as a coach, and of course, most importantly, your role as a coach in this program. So what exactly is coaching? What are the major goals and characteristics of coaching as a practice? Well, I spend a lot of time communicating this to my clients as well as my students. And I think this first bullet point is probably about the best sort of starting definition: confidential, results oriented, and highly personal learning process. So, what do we mean by that? Let's take a look at each of these components. The confidentiality is key. A coach is not a mole or a spy that works with an employee or an individual and then reports the details of that back to a boss, back to a teacher, back to a professor, back to an organization. One of the most essential components of coaching is that it is confidential. That way, people can really open up. That way, we can really get at, again, the higher order leadership and management skills. Because you have to imagine to yourself, if somebody really needs to work on, for example, their ability to communicate effectively with people that they work with as a coaching goal, we have to appreciate that perhaps they won't tell you that they have that challenge if they're not assured that the process is confidential. People are really reluctant to reveal any of their shortcomings if, in fact, they believe that the person they're revealing them to is going to go on and blab about this and talk about it. So coaching is confidential. Results oriented. Coaching, and we're going to talk more about this, but coaching is based upon the idea that we can actually improve upon people's behavior by encouraging them to act in different ways and behave in different ways. And of course, the ultimate goal of coaching is not necessarily things like awareness, understanding, analysis. It's not about those things. It's actually about results. So, for example, if one of our goals in coaching is to help the coach be a better communicator, the kind of results we're looking for is more effectiveness of their communication. We're looking for outcomes that speak to them being able to achieve their goals as a manager and as a leader. So coaching is highly results oriented. Coaching is also a highly personal learning process. In other words, distinct from a course, perhaps even like this one, where we are outlining what are the things you're going to learn. In a coaching endeavor, we might have a basis of what we want to teach our coachee about or what we want to communicate to them, but it's a personal learning process that's in the curriculum, if you will. And the goals, they're driven by the relationship between the coach and the coachee. Secondly, coaching is not about changing people and making them into different people. It's really about building on talents. And why do we say this? Certainly, I'm a firm believer, and also have had a tremendous amount of experience to illustrate that people are already skilled at many of the things that we're going to teach you about today. Many of you might already even have these skills, but the real strength is being able to move them from one context to another. So, for example, you as a coach might be a very excellent communicator, in your professional life, but perhaps personally or in terms of dealing with clients, that communication is different. So really, what we would want to do in that case is bring some of the things you're good at in one place and bring them over to another. So what is that really about? That's a philosophical sort of basis for coaching that says you're already great at a lot of stuff, so let's build on your talents and let's enhance the professional effectiveness rather than closing a gap or trying to be something that you're not. Of course, once we move along a little bit in life, we realize that you really can't change people at all. What we can do is build on stuff they're already good at. And of course, one of my favorite jokes is the only people who believe that you can change other people, newlyweds. Doesn't work out too well. Thirdly, coaching is about improving performance and effectiveness. It's about being able to look at the goals you already have in your life and being able to, quite frankly, enhance those. It's based upon a couple of things. First of all, it's based upon a notion of self-awareness. So in other words, in order to really be able to, from the coach's perspective, the only way the coachee can really get help from you as a coach is if you help them and aid them in becoming more self-aware. And if they come into the process of being self-aware, what does that mean? We're going to talk about that more in this program. But really, it's about being able to look at an individual's practice, craft, skills, job, and being able to say, you know what? There are things that I need to work on. There are things that I can improve. It's also, again, about enhancing effectiveness through specific goals for improvement. In other words, we're really focusing in on our coaching practice on defining really distinct goals. The idea that we're going to spend 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever it is with a coach, and we're going to cover every single element of leadership and management. It's not realistic. So the whole point of coaching is we base it upon goals that we set together and that come from and emanate from the experience of the coach. It is based on personal action planning and implementation. It is not the notion that we have some cool and interesting ideas or theories in our head, and we're going to go out into the world and think about these theories and pontificate about them and chat about them and theorize about them. No, it's about action planning. So a big part of your role, and we're going to talk more about this again, as a coach is to try to encourage your coachee to act upon the goals that they had decided to act upon. And we're going to talk about some real specific tools, really easy ones to use, really easy to use and implement that we can use for this purpose. Next, coaching is about encouraging people to surface and question the way that they have framed their points of view about themselves, about others, about their own circumstances. Of course, if we are stuck on the notion that everything we're doing is fantastic and that the only reason we might have a challenge, a problem, a need is because of something outside of ourselves, we're not going to be very successful in a coaching endeavor. We have to, as a coach, encourage people to really critically examine the way they look at things. I'm reminded of when I come in to meet my MBAs on their first day of school in the fall, and they're bright-eyed and very excited to learn and become better at being better managers and business people, entrepreneurs. But one of their big challenges, and I find this with a lot of folks, is that we really don't question ourselves. And what I tell them is the only way you're going to learn and broaden your skills as a student, same thing with as a coach, is to be wrong. One of my most favorite ways of communicating this to students is, again, be wrong and you will learn. Be right and now you're an advocate, which is not a coach. It might be something else. There's plenty of roles that you're going to engage in your life where you can be an advocate for a point of view, where your role is to get behind something else. But as a coach, and as a coach, most importantly, you really have to question the way you look at things. And your role as a coach is to really try to encourage that in people, creating a shift in behavior, creating a shift in communication, and creating a shift and a change, possibly in career goals. That is our ultimate objective in coaching. So let's take a look at some of the approaches that we might use in coaching. Coaching is not so theoretical. In other words, we're not necessarily communicating to coachees a theory, a philosophy, and a way of thinking. That certainly might be part of the process, but coaching is really not so theoretical. It's really actually, if anything, it's behavioral. In other words, we are very interested in helping develop behavioral change in the coachee that we're working with. We explore these behavior changes in the context of ongoing real situations, ongoing real relationships, ongoing solid roles that we're in, and real projects and procedures that we're already engaged in. One of the interesting things about coaching is one of the things that really makes it so sought after and so worthwhile is that when we're working with a coachee, we're really helping them develop the skills that are required and that they have set for themselves in the context of things that they're already doing. So rather than talking generically about management context and leadership context, we really try to stick with what I would call stories, examples that come from the students, from the coachee. Their stories and their examples, they're real examples. This is a really great way to really get the best out of a coaching endeavor. We also try to use, I think, one of the most important and most efficacious approaches to learning and change, which is the idea of reflection. Reflection is a notion that says, we're going to talk more about this. But reflection is a notion that says, I'm going to look at what I've done after I've done it and carefully and critically examine it and ask myself some really important questions. Like, for example, if I wanted to convince somebody of X, my reflection would be, did I convince someone of X? What did I do? Can I recall and actually identify and articulate the behaviors that I engaged in to get that such that I can change them in the form of an action plan for the future? A big part of this is to be able to reframe, to look at things that stand in our way like other people, processes, culture, experience, and look at those things that we might have viewed as obstacles and look at it and say, you know what, I can learn from that. I can learn from something that I failed at. And of course, this is a common, sort of cultural notion that we learn from mistakes. But really, what does that look like in the real world? How do you learn from a mistake? And this is a big part of what we're going to look at in terms of us learning as coaches to really help a coachee. How do we help them reframe? So, what a coach is and what a coach is not, really important. Understanding your role as a coach is critical, of course, to your success. So this is a nice little laundry list, but I think we'll walk through this and just take a look at it, what is the role of a coach? Now, I want to start by saying the real role of a coach is an educator. That's what a coach is. A coach is somebody who teaches either based on their experience, based on something that they've read, based on something that they know, they're educating and teaching the person that they're working with. Of course, part of that is that the coachee is able to share with you some of their challenges. Therefore, your role as a coach is also as a trusted advisor, somebody who has a confidential, as I mentioned earlier, trusting relationship with a coachee in your situation, a student, such that he or she can provide the coachee advice and guidance. Your goal is really to reveal new perspectives, and sometimes I like to call this shining light in dark corners. In other words, if there's another way to look at something, and perhaps you haven't looked at it in that light, a real great opportunity for you as a coach to really make a profound influence is to shine a light on that, to say to your coach, there's another way to look at it. Have you thought about it from this perspective? This is especially true when we're thinking about, we're going to talk a lot about this for the program, when we're talking about the other person. So one of the things you're going to encounter, probably as a coach, is that when looking at challenges of your coachee, let's say we want to help them develop their leadership ability, their ability to influence other people. Let's say, for example, well, oftentimes the coachee will say to you, I'm doing my influence perfectly. It's just that they're not listening. Of course, that is not really a productive way of looking at this, because again, you can't change other people. So perhaps a new perspective in this sense might be able to say, hey, you know what? Maybe we can learn something from what you see. Maybe there's something about that other individual that you need to tap into. Maybe there's a way to connect with them that you haven't thought of before. So sometimes our goal is to reveal some new perspectives to the coachee. And again, to help with the goals of the students, it's really important to try very hard not to pursue our own agenda and our own personal philosophies. It really has to be driven primarily by the goals of the student. You are a colleague. You can see on the slide, this is what has worked for me approach. This is a really interesting way of thinking about it. You know where this comes from? This comes from, I apologize to people who this isn't part of their experience, but I'll share this with you. No one gets more advice in life than a new parent. One of the things my wife and I discovered along the way with our children is that if you give a new parent advice on child rearing, they'll rebel and push back on you. One of the things I've noticed is that if you change the frame by which you give them advice, maybe they'll be more willing to take it. So in other words, instead of saying, this is the thing that works, coachee, in terms of influencing your boss, we might want to try something like, you know what? I'm not so sure this will work for everyone, but this is what has worked for me. And this meets two goals. Number one, we're not speaking any universal truth because, of course, context is everything. One approach A, might work with one person. Same approach might not work with another. But most importantly, we are making our coachee more receptive to the advice that we're giving them. I'm not telling you, coachee, this is the way of the universe. Just saying, this is what has worked for me. And I have found that this approach works really well as a coach. You are not a therapist, you are not an analyst, and you're not a psychologist. Now, granted, perhaps I'm speaking to somebody right now in this group of folks who might be looking at this who perhaps is a psychologist. I'm going to guess probably not, but this is one of the major challenges for coaches, internal, external, and in the kind of role that you're in. It is very exciting and empowering to feel that you can analyze and figure somebody else out. It feels fantastic. Everybody loves it. It taps into some universal needs we have for things like judgment of others, analysis of other people, and our own self-esteem to do that. So, of course, we know it's really wonderful to be able to look at yourself as a therapist. But what I'm saying here nicely is I'm warning you that you are not a therapist. A, this is not the role. B, analyzing people, analyzing your students, coming across like you're analyzing your students will be met with resistance. They will not like it. Nobody does, unless they opt into it. And even then they may not like it. Thirdly, you're not qualified probably. This is not your skill set. So don't even bother. This is not the goal of a coach. A coach, again, is an advisor, an educator, and a colleague. It is not a critical sort of paternalistic role where you are the mother hen or the father hen and you're teaching them the ways of the universe. Again, why? Because it will be met with resistance. There is a chance that your students might not be as far along. In fact, they will not be as far along in their career. And there might be a tendency to sort of come across like what I call, you know all this. When I was a kid, we walked 20 blocks to school, uphill both ways with no shoes. Well, nobody likes that actually. People are not receptive to it. It's not conducive to being able to give advice. And your role is not to criticize. Look at results. We don't have to, if a coachee has a goal to achieve in their work, in their job, in their career, and you help them get there, the outcome of them not getting to be critical of them, to say, you didn't do it, largely because they know that. Secondly, because criticism is met with defensiveness. Defensiveness produces a lack of willingness to learn, and that will, quite frankly, mess up your objectives. You're not a mediator. Another really important one. I don't imagine that you would encounter this in this particular context, but in some, your coachee might come and tell you, I have a problem with this individual. My boss, the person I'm working with, whatever. And there is a tendency to want to sit down with these two individuals and help them out. Don't do that. Your goal as a coach is to provide some perspective and perhaps some new behavioral changes for that coachee to engage in so that they can solve the problems on their own. This is an old idea. It's the old fish thing. Everyone know that? Teach a man to fish? I think everyone knows it. So your goal is to really help them be able to do it on their own, not a mediator. This is not, again, about your own personal agenda and philosophy. Again, it's really important to focus on being driven by the goals of your coach. Although in some contexts, the coaches might in fact be the manager or boss. That is not the case here. So it is very important not to look at yourself as the manager or boss of the individual that you're helping. Again, try to keep it collegial. That will make a big difference. So I'd mentioned at the beginning that we're going to talk a little bit about how coaching meets the needs of all the stakeholders in the process of the program that you're in and across the entire practice of coaching. And I usually sort of put this as, why do we even bother with coaching in the first place? let's start out with looking at how does coaching meet the needs of an organization. So specifically in the course of this context, where it's speaking about primarily the organization that your coachees work in. Now, again, I understand that you'll probably not be, well, in many cases, you will not be coaching a student who works in the same organization as you do. But nonetheless, I think it's really important to look at how does coaching benefit the organization that the coachee lives in. So first of all, coaching is an important part of being able to help orient an individual to a new culture and a new organization and a new way of working and a new job or position. When we engage with individuals as a coach, we're really helping that individual develop the kinds of leadership and management skills that will enhance the performance of the organization that they work in. Sometimes that's what I call a parallel development. In other words, we help an individual become better at these higher order skills, being a better person, being a better leader, being a better communicator, being a better motivator, all these things. And of course, the place that they live cannot help but improve. And that, of course, includes the organization, the department, the management relationship that they have with individuals, either as an employee or as a manager. Coaching, certainly from the perspective of an internal course in an organization, can also help with succession planning. So, for example, actually, now that I think about it, it might even be the case when you're coaching someone who doesn't work in the same organization that you do. When we help people develop their skills and help them be better at stuff, it helps the organization figure out who should be in those more senior positions. If we can help someone elevate their leadership, their higher order leadership and management skills, we're actually helping that organization decide and figure out and develop an individual for future roles and positions in that organization. Coaching is also an essential part, and becoming increasingly so, an essential part of the ongoing learning and development of the people within an organization. And, we'll get into this when we look at the needs of the coach some more. But people are demanding, employees are demanding learning and development. And part of that is workshops and traditional sources of learning in books and webinars, etc. But a really rich form of learning for both the organization and for the coachee is the opportunity to develop the skills ongoing throughout the course of work using relevant examples and situations and contexts that people are currently experiencing. Again, the idea of parallel development, which I've mentioned. I think another really important one, certainly from the perspective of an internal coach, and I know that's probably not the case for many people listening, but certainly with respect to an eye on the future in your role as your coach, the employment brand. Employment branding is a very interesting and really rich notion that is becoming more and more important from a number of perspectives in today's workplace. The notion that we can coach an individual inside of an organization, help them learn and development, make that coaching part of how we manage and work with that individual, can also help the employment brand. In other words, the more that individual improves, that coach goes out into the world and says, hey, this place that I work has provided me a coach. Or, hey, this designation that I'm working towards has provided me a coach. This helps enhance the brand of that particular organization. Hey, you know what? CPA helps me develop myself as a better leader and manager. And what this employment branding says, that's good for the CPA. Also, the notion of performance improvement. More and more organizations are realizing that traditional performance appraisals or performance reviews or performance evaluations don't really serve the purpose of actually helping people be better. What they become is a corporate report card. When people get the grades, they can't do anything about it anymore. That's one of the things we want to try to avoid in organizations. In our education system, again, which I'm a part of, we give people an evaluation at the point at which they can't do anything about it anymore. But in an organization, we have the opportunity to provide or work with an individual as a coach and be able to really help improve their performance such that when they get their report card, we can almost guarantee they're going to get a pretty good mark. That's what real proactive learning and development or performance improvement is about. So, what about the coachee? Again, you might be coaching someone and probably will be coaching somebody outside of your organization, but this is still relevant to you in a whole number of ways. So, let's talk a little bit about why bother with coaching from the perspective of the coach. In this case, your student. Really wonderful concept I spend a lot of time on with my students, the idea of what we call the new psychological contract. It's a really fancy way for saying employees today. Young people today, new entrants into this and other professional fields now demand learning and development as a part of work. It's no longer the case that, some would argue that it never was. There was this cultural recognition that we're lucky to have a job and we're lucky to have a profession. Today, employees are saying, yeah, I guess I'm lucky to have a job and a profession, but you're also lucky to have me, and you have a responsibility to help me learn and develop. That's the new psychological contract. This is expected today in organizations and in professional fields and professional education contexts like the CPA. People who are listening to this right now might have thought of this before in their lives. I bet you there's a lot of you that have. Hey, you know what? I can do 1,000 things right in my job and I don't hear a darn word. But when I do something wrong, I hear it a lot. And you know what? This is problematic. Because what ends up happening in many organizations and in many contexts is that people who have the most problems get the most attention. And those high performers who do things really well maybe don't get the face time with a manager or a coach that perhaps they would like to. So high performers in an organization, many of their needs can be met by having access to a coach who can help them improve upon the things that they're good at already. From the perspective of the coach, it also adds to our motivation. This is something we're going to talk a little bit more about in a later module. But basically, the opportunity to get a chance to see how, from the perspective of another person, how your actions turned out, to be able to sit down with another impartial individual and say, hey, I was really trying in my work to accomplish this, and here's what happened. Here's what the outcome was. The opportunity to see the end results of any actions that you make is something that we call sometimes task identity. Again, we're going to talk about this some more as the program moves along. And from the perspective of a coachee, the more a coachee gets to talk and explore the outcomes of their work, the more motivated they are to do that work, even if those outcomes are unsuccessful. It avoids, again, the squeaky wheel syndrome. In other words, we spend internally in organizations, we tend to spend as managers and coaches more time with the people who are problematic and less with the ones who are not. It's the old squeaky wheel gets the grease. When you make coaching part of how you do your work in an organization, then we can avoid this problem. Again, as I mentioned before in the descriptions of the needs for the organization, this can also help with performance management. And believe it or not, actually coaches, the recipients, your students, they want to have their performance managed. You know why? Because they want to do well. They want to do well. They want to do better. People show up to work to do well. I don't believe that anyone shows up to work to do a bad job. But sometimes we just need some guidance. And the guidance provided by a formal manager maybe doesn't cut it. One of the most exciting things about the role that you're in as a coach. Lastly, the opportunity to get a coach, to have a manager as a coach, to have a senior individual outside of the organization as a coach. Any of the roles as a coach can actually help make employees feel more satisfied in their jobs. Again, I know you might be coaching somebody outside your organization, but I strongly believe this is still relevant to you as a coach. So let's look at this. How does coaching, how can getting feedback, how can learning new things, how can new perspectives and reflection make for more employee satisfaction? Well, because it provides four essential things for employees and for the coachee, I should say. One, direction. When you're working with a coach, you're going to perhaps, based upon their goals, provide them some direction. In other words, hey, you know what? You want to be able to be regarded as an expert in your organization. Here's the thing you should go after. Try to convince people of this. Try to do that. Try to illustrate your skills in this way. Direction, a goal. When employees get goals, they know what is needed to be done to be seen as successful, and they want that. Not only does it provide direction, you as a coach can also provide them guidance. You can help them. You can say, hey, you want to go get that thing? I have some advice to give you because this, again, is what has worked for me. Thirdly, transparency. Coaching provides an opportunity for individuals to get open, honest feedback that isn't complicated. And this is especially true in your role, that it isn't complicated by the context of employment. In other words, you get the chance to be really honest with people in a way that perhaps their boss or manager would not. And finally, development. Getting better at stuff. People want to get better. I'm always reminded when I look at this direction, guidance, transparency, development. I'm always reminded of a little story I once heard about a woman, a family, who hired a nanny cleaning lady to live in at their house. This is an individual who, in this particular case, somebody who had lots and lots of money and was able to hire a live-in to take care of her kids and her and everything else that goes on in their house. Now, the family was a little bit annoyed because the maid was not cleaning things the way the woman liked. She was not happy about this, but was very afraid to give the feedback to the nanny. She sort of felt it was very petty and thought to herself, this is somebody who doesn't have the kind of income and opportunities that I have, and I feel guilty giving her feedback. But of course, it doesn't make a lot of sense because nanny or maid, they want that individual who runs the household to say, you've done a great job. Transparency is the only way to give honest and open feedback to people such that they can advance in their roles. And that's something you have the opportunity to provide as a coach. What about your needs? What about the ways in which coaching can help benefit you as a coach? Well, the opportunity that you have before you in this program is magnanimous. The opportunity to develop other people for the future and have an impact in your field is tremendous. The opportunity to be able to have an input, some influence on the future of organizations, on the future of your field, is something a lot of people just don't get the chance to do. One of the most basic needs that people have is something called generativity. In other words, the opportunity to have an impact on future generations. And there's not always a tremendous amount of opportunities to do this, but you have the opportunity to do it. And passing on knowledge, passing on this is what has worked for me feels really good. It feels good to be able to help somebody else and see the results of their actions, especially given that you're going to be coaching successively. In other words, you're going to be able to work with an individual to set a goal, to set some behavioral examples of how to achieve that goal, and get a chance to meet them again and see, okay, so how did that turn out? That feels great. And for some people, it can really provide a renewed or new purpose for them in their careers and their work. It can also really contribute to your teaching and helping skills, essential parts of being a productive manager and leader. Learning how I can help somebody. What kinds of approaches do you need to learn to help another individual? And you're going to learn from teaching and coaching as well. It might be reminders. In other words, there's probably lots about the things that we're going to learn in this program that you know already. But sometimes a little tap on the shoulder just to remind us of some of these skills is really, really helpful. Because perhaps we haven't used them in all elements of our work. We actually, also, one of the things that's really cool about being a coach is you actually learn from your students. You will actually learn from the people around you new things and new ideas that perhaps you didn't know before. And as you do, you will accumulate examples and stories that you can bring to your management and your work and your career. What are, overall, the social and professional goals of coaching? Not going to spend a ton of time on this, but we're going to get into it. We're going to get into some of these things throughout the course of the program. Again, the goals of coaching include helping, teaching, learning how to listen, or just reminding ourselves how difficult it is to listen, learning from other people, rapport development, learning how can I develop the kind of relationship that enables me to give someone advice, networking, the opportunity to connect with a young person, with a new entrant to the field. Because coaching is not analytical or judgmental. It actually really helps us with humility. And I think this is an essential part of the skills for any job in the future, any role. It also helps us really see that there are different perspectives. There are different sets of goals that people have. There are different experiences that are totally unique to my own. And you learn this from working with your coachees. You also help people develop a skill in the context in which they're using it, which, again, is much more effective than any other approach. And you are getting the opportunity by illustrating the value of some of these higher order skills to develop and advance and enhance the careers of the people that you're working with. So we're going to coach this coachee. There's a whole bunch of different ways to coach this coachee, but primarily we're looking at the external coach, the internal coach, and of course, your role as a coach in this program. So, an external coach. This is like a professional coach that exists from outside the organization. Often they're hired by the organization to work with, usually a senior executive, manager, C-level employee. And the specific goals might be outlined by the coach. But in this case, in the case of the external coach, they might also be outlined by the manager of the individual, the coach. It might also be outlined by the organization itself, as well, might set those goals. An external coach is usually hired to deal with the application of some skill set based on the things like a performance review. Perhaps there was a shortage of some specific skills, a performance improvement program for an employee who's having challenges, and maybe some other needs that the organization has decided upon. Usually in an external coach, there are multiple sessions over a period of time, and usually these would occur outside of the office. A professional external coach would probably either go to their own workspace or maybe even a coffee shop or some neutral environment to work with that individual. An internal coach is usually a trained coach, a professional coach, but somebody who actually works inside the organization, usually with a connection to the human resources department. Could be a manager of another area or department, or it could be even the coach's own manager, which of course has a whole set of challenges in and of itself. Very difficult sometimes to have a management-employee relationship that is also a coach-coachee-employee relationship. There's a lot of challenges associated with this, primarily around things like transparency, confidentiality, lack of judgment, and a conflict of interest. So this brings me to one of the wonderful things about why it's so fantastic that you get to be a coach in this context. In most cases, you're going to be outside of the organization, and you're going to be able to help develop career goals. You're not going to be acting as a career coach in this context with these students, but the things that you teach them perhaps will have an impact on their career. How? Help them elevate their skills, help them get better at what they do, help them get better at their management skills. Help to highlight and develop the specific higher order skills that your coaches need to succeed, which is, of course, the ultimate goal of the program. It's to be able to really help your coachees develop these high order skills. Skills in the area of leadership, social skills, working well with other people, developing rapport and relationship with others, how to manage conflict, how to help enhance their own self-awareness, their own EQ or emotional intelligence, and to be able to have the kind of skills that enable them to make the richest kind of career choices. But you know what? We're going to talk a lot about theory and some complicated, interesting ideas. Sometimes, though, it's just about encouragement. And we don't want to lose sight of that. Sometimes it's just about encouragement.
Whoa, you're not just gonna walk away and give up.
Stuck.
You can get that. That's yours. Nobody else. Get in there and give it some heat. Give it some heat. Get it some heat. Get in there and you get it. You go in there and you go get it hard. You get it. You get it. That's the one right there. You get it. Yes. All right. Yes.
So what are we doing next? We're going to look at coaching for improved work performance. We're going to take a look at some ways and approaches that you can use as a coach to try to help improve the work performance of the individual coachees that you're working with. We're going to talk a little bit about motivation to help us understand a little bit about what motivates people, an important concept to really wrap our heads around as a coach. We're going to look at some specific applications. We're going to be looking in terms of motivation really at goal setting and the idea of theoretical notions behind why goal setting really helps for motivation, really helps for the management of the outcomes that we want and that our coachee wants, and to be able to set the kinds of expectations that we have, both in terms of goal achievement and the relationship we have with our coachees. Thank you.